The galaxy was a sprawling nervous system of trade routes and silence, punctuated by the burning anger of stars and the cold ambition of the empires that spanned them. From the heavy gravity worlds of the Dravari Dominion to the scattered, frantic colonies of the human coalition, the news feeds were screaming the same story. They played the footage on a loop, a grainy, high-contrast recording that had already been dissected by 1 billion analysts. It showed the heavy, Baroque silhouette of the flagship Iron Wing hovering over the rust-colored curve of the mining moon Virex 7. Then, without warning, the hull buckled. A white-blue flare, brighter than the local sun, tore the vessel apart from the inside out. There was no sound in the vacuum, just the violent expansion of gas and debris, the death of a legend in absolute silence. Warlord Kaelor was dead, the architect of the 20-year truce, the only Dravari leader who had managed to look a human general in the eye without reaching for a plasma blade, had been vaporized in a microsecond. Sarathra stood in the center of the darkened ceremonial hall aboard the flagship crypt Obsidian Prayer. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and crushed heavy metals, the traditional incense of a Dravari state funeral. She did not weep. To weep was to admit that the universe had taken something from her that she could not claw back. And Sarathra, known across 3 sectors as the Dragon Woman, admitted nothing. She wore the ceremonial armor of a widow regent. It was a masterpiece of black chrome and woven orbital steel, designed to look like a second skin. It fit her tall, powerful frame with suffocating precision. Her helmet was off, held in the crook of her arm, revealing a face that human poets had called terrifyingly beautiful and Dravari soldiers simply called sharp. Her skin was a pale violet, iridescent under the low lights, and her hair was a cascade of silver braids woven with mourning beads. But it was her eyes that held the room captive. They were gold, with vertical slit pupils that dilated and contracted with the rhythm of her heartbeat, scanning the shadows for threats. Around her, the hall was filled with the high nobility of the Dominion. They were tall, broad-shouldered figures draped in thermal capes, their faces obscured by breathing masks or ritual veils. Sarathra could hear their whispers even over the low thrum of the ship's engines. "He left no heir," a high counselor murmured near a pillar of carved basalt. His voice was a low growl, barely subsonic. "The lineage is broken. She hears you," another whispered back. "Look at her hands. She is holding back the shift." Sarathra tightened her grip on her helmet. They were right, beneath the armor. Her physiology was reacting to the stress and the grief she refused to acknowledge. The bioluminescent scales that lined her spine and collarbones were flaring with a dull, rhythmic heat. If she lost control, the humanoid facade would crack, and the draconic heritage of her people would tear through. She would become a creature of fire and claw, a beast of war. She forced her breathing to slow. In, 2, 3. Out, 2, 3. The heavy blast doors at the far end of the hall hissed open. The atmosphere in the room shifted from mournful to frigid. The human delegation had arrived. They walked in a tight wedge formation, a dozen of them in the stiff, charcoal gray dress uniforms of the Coalition Diplomatic Corps. They looked small compared to the towering Dravari warriors, fragile in their soft skin and lack of natural armor. Yet they walked with the smug assurance of a species that had mastered economics where the Dravari had mastered war. Sarathra watched them approach. She felt the weight of their gaze physically, like a damp cloth pressed against her skin. They looked at her not as a grieving wife, but as a volatile asset, a variable in an equation they were trying to balance. She saw the way their eyes lingered on the curve of her breastplate, then flicked to the empty dais where Kaelor should have stood. There was pity there, perhaps, but it was the pity one feels for a dangerous animal that has lost its keeper. "Lady Sarathra," the lead diplomat said, bowing his head just enough to be polite but not enough to show submission. "We offer the condolences of the Earth Senate. Warlord Kalor was a visionary. His loss is a tragedy for both our species." "He was murdered," Sarathra said. Her voice was low, resonating in her chest, carrying a timbre that vibrated against the human's ribcage. "It was not a tragedy. It was an act of war." The diplomat smiled, a tight, practiced expression that did not reach his eyes. "An investigation is pending, my lady. Let us not rush to conclusions that might destabilize the alliance. We are here to ensure the transition of power is smooth. We understand that under Dravari law, you must remarry within 1 standard year or surrender your husband's holdings to his blood kin. The threat hung in the air, naked and ugly. Marry one of the cousins circling you like carrion birds, or lose everything." Sarathra stared at him until the diplomat blinked and looked away. "I will do what is necessary for my people," she said. "Do not mistake my grief for weakness. Ambassador, if you push me, you will find that I am not Kalor. I do not have his patience." She turned her back on them, dismissing the entire delegation with a swirl of her heavy cape. As she stared up at the holographic memorial of her husband, she felt a cold knot of isolation tighten in her gut. They blamed her. She could feel it. They thought she should have been there. They thought she should have died with him. Light years away, in the gritty, humming bowels of the orbital habitat Axis 9. The same news footage was playing on a cracked monitor bolted to a cafeteria wall. Jace leaned on his mop handle, watching the white-blue explosion for the 10th time that hour. He was 24 years old, though the dark circles under his eyes and the cynical set of his mouth made him look older. He wore a gray jumpsuit that had been patched so many times it was more thread than fabric, with the logo of Orbital Sanitation Services fading on the breast pocket. "Boom," Jace whispered, mimicking the explosion. "There goes the neighborhood." Miller, an older man with skin like tanned leather and a back permanently hunched from 30 years of scrubbing floors, grunted from the next table. He was nursing a cup of synthetic coffee that smelled vaguely of burnt rubber. "Do not look at it, kid," Miller said. "It is bad luck to stare at the dead, especially the high and mighty ones. They drag you down with them." Jace turned back to his work, pushing the mop across the scuffed polymer tiles. The water in his bucket was gray and foaming with harsh chemical solvents. "It is just weird." "Miller, look at that ship. It is worth more than this entire station. More than my home planet, probably. And it just pops like a balloon. Makes you wonder what the point is." "Point is to keep your head down and get paid," Miller said. "You finished Section 4 yet? The drone jammer is acting up again." "I fixed it," Jace said. He tapped the side of a squat, cylindrical cleaning drone that was humming softly near his feet. "Unit 7 here just needed a little percussive maintenance and a sensor wipe. He is a good boy, aren't you?" "7?" The drone beeped a binary affirmative and spun its brushes happily. "You talk to the machines too much," Miller grumbled. "It is creepy." "They are better listeners than the shift supervisor," Jace said with a grin. He checked the time on his data pad. The screen was shattered in the corner, a spiderweb of glass over the glowing numbers. He winced. He had 6 hours left on this shift, and then a 4-hour turnaround before his second job at the cargo docks. He pulled up his account balance. It was flashing red. The debt payments back to the colony administration on Mars were automated, stripping his wages the second they hit his account. He had 70 credits to last him 2 weeks. That meant nutrient paste for dinner again, and maybe skipping the heat in his dorm pod to save power. Jace looked back at the screen. The camera had cut to the interior of the funeral ship. He saw a figure in black armor, tall and imposing, standing alone amidst a crowd of bowing dignitaries. Even through the low-resolution feed, she looked terrifying. "That is her," Jace said, nodding at the screen. "The widow. They call her the Dragon Woman. She looks like she could eat a tank," Miller said. "She looks sad," Jace murmured, almost to himself. Miller laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Sad? She is a Warlord, kid. She is probably calculating how many battalions she can buy with the insurance money. Do not project your bleeding heart onto the lizard people. They do not work like us." Jace shrugged, dipping his mop back into the bucket. "Maybe. But grief is grief, right? Doesn't matter if you have scales or skin, when if you lose your person, you lose your person." He pushed the cart forward, the wheels squeaking in protest. He had a corridor to finish, and the universe did not stop for dead warlords or broke janitors. 2 weeks later, the universe brought the Dragon Woman to Axis 9. The station was neutral territory, a spinning wheel of commerce and diplomacy located at the Lagrange point between the human coalition and the Dravari Dominion. It was a place of neon markets, shady backroom deals, and gleaming consular spires. Sarathra hated it. She sat in a conference room on the top level of the consulate spire. The walls were transparent aluminum, offering a dizzying view of the gas giant below, a swirling storm of orange and bruised purple. The room was kept at a chilly 20 degrees standard, comfortable for the humans, freezing for her. She sat perfectly still, her hands clasped on the table, her thermal cape drawn tight around her shoulders. Across the table sat the Joint Oversight Council, 3 humans, 2 Dravari. The air was thick with tension. "We cannot authorize a fleet mobilization." "Lady Sarathra," said Councilman Harrows, a human with a face like a dried apple. "The treaty is specific, without proof of external aggression. Moving your husband's armada to the border is considered a provocation." "Provocation?" Sarathra's voice was ice. "My husband was assassinated. His ship was sabotaged. I have every right to secure my borders." The Dravari representative, a cousin of her late husband named Vorath, leaned forward. His eyes were cold. "Perhaps, Sarathra, the issue was not sabotage. We all know Kaelor was unconventional. He took risks. Some say he was careless with his reactor containment protocols. It would not be the first time Dravari recklessness led to disaster." The insult landed like a physical blow. To accuse a warlord of negligence was a grave dishonor. To accuse Kaelor, who was meticulous to a fault, was a lie meant to discredit his legacy and strip her of her power. Sarathra felt the heat rising in her blood. Under the table, her fingernails dug into her palms, drawing a drop of violet blood. A ripple of bioluminescence flared along her neck, visible even under the high collar of her dress uniform. "Are you suggesting," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "that my husband killed himself and 5,000 of his best soldiers because he was incompetent?" "I am suggesting," Vorath said smoothly, "that a woman in your position should focus on finding a new husband to manage these complex military matters, rather than chasing ghosts." The room went silent. The misogyny was blatant, wrapped in the guise of tradition. Sarathra stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "This meeting is over," she said. "I will not sit here and listen to you defile his memory. I will secure my holdings with or without your approval." She turned and stormed out of the room, ignoring the calls for her to return. She walked fast, her boots striking the polished floor with a rhythm like a heartbeat. She needed to get away. She needed air, or at least a different kind of recycled air. She turned down a corridor, away from the main diplomatic lifts, seeking the solitude of the service levels. Her mind was a storm. She remembered Kaylor's last message, sent just minutes before the explosion. "Stay strong, my heart. The tide is turning." He had known something. He had been protecting her. And now she was alone, surrounded by wolves who smiled and offered her tea while they sharpened their knives. She turned a sharp corner near the maintenance access tunnels, her vision blurred by unshed tears and blinding rage. She was not looking where she was going. She was a warlord's widow, a creature of power, and the world was supposed to move for her. It did not move. Jace was listening to a thumping bass track in his earbuds, bobbing his head as he pushed a heavy cart of industrial cleaning solvents around the bend. He was thinking about whether he could afford real noodles tonight. He turned the corner fast, pivoting on his heel to give the cart some momentum. He saw the flash of black and gold a fraction of a second too late. "Whoa!" he yelled, trying to dig his heels in. They collided with a force that knocked the wind out of both of them. Jace's cart spun wildly. A bucket of concentrated cleaning fluid tipped over. In the lower gravity of the upper spire, the blue liquid did not splash. It erupted into a cloud of shimmering, floating spheres. Sarathra stumbled back, her heavy boots slipping on the slick floor. She would have fallen if not for her heightened reflexes, catching herself against the bulkhead. Jace was not so lucky. He went down hard, sliding across the tiles in a tangle of limbs and plastic buckets. For a moment, time seemed to suspend itself. The laws of physics took a breath. Hundreds of tiny blue crystal droplets of fluid floated in the air between them, catching the light from the gas giant outside the window. Through the field of suspended liquid, Sarathra's eyes locked onto Jace's. Her eyes were wide, the vertical pupils blown round with shock, blazing with an inner golden light. Jace stared up at her, his brown human eyes wide with panic. The silence was broken by the sound of boots pounding the floor. Two of Sarathra's personal guards rounded the corner, plasma rifles raised and charged with a high-pitched whine. They aimed directly at Jace's chest. "Target acquired." One guard barked, "Down!" "Stay down!" Jace scrambled backward, his hands slipping in the fluid. I am sorry. It was an accident. I did not see her." He looked at the guards, then back at Sarathra. He expected anger. He expected the legendary rage of the dragon woman. He waited to be vaporized. Sarathra stared at him. She saw a young human male sprawled in a puddle of chemicals, wearing a uniform that was 2 sizes too big. He looked terrified, but in that terror there was no recognition of her status. He did not see a political pawn or a widow or a monster. He just saw a woman he had accidentally knocked over. "Hold fire," Sarathra commanded. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. The guards hesitated. "My lady, he assaulted you. He tripped," Sarathra said. "Lower your weapons. That is an order." The guards lowered their rifles but kept their fingers near the triggers. Sarathra looked down at Jace. "Stand up, human." Jace swallowed hard. He scrambled to his feet, slipping once more before steadying himself on the overturned cart. He grabbed a rag from his belt and instinctively reached out to wipe a splatter of blue fluid from her armor, then froze, realizing he was about to touch a member of the Dravari high nobility. I am really sorry," Jace stammered. "I was going too fast. Floor safety violation. I will write myself up. I promise." He gave a nervous, lopsided grin. It was a defense mechanism, a reflex born of a lifetime of being the smallest guy in the room. Sarathra blinked. He was joking. He was facing armed guards and a dragon warlord, and he was making a joke about safety violations. She looked at him closer. She saw the calluses on his hands, rough and stained with grease. She saw the cheap iron-on repair patches on his sleeves. She saw the exhaustion etched into the corners of his eyes, familiar and deep. And she saw his face, open, unguarded, and frantically apologetic. Then she looked at her own hands. They were trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the collision and the lingering stress of the council meeting. Jace saw the tremble too. He stopped wiping the air and looked at her face. The fear in his eyes dialed back a notch, replaced by something else. Concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. He did not say, "My lady." He did not say, "Your Highness." He just asked, "You look shaken." Sarathra stiffened. She was not used to being asked that. "I am fine," she said, her voice regaining its composure. "You should watch where you are going." "Janitor, I know," Jace said. "I really do. I will clean this up in a second. Just, you sure you are all right? You looked like you were 1,000,000 miles away before we crashed." Sarathra felt a strange sensation in her chest. It was not the heat of anger. It was a crack in the ice. This boy, this clumsy, irreverent human was looking at her with genuine worry. He saw the shadow of heartbreak that she had spent 2 weeks hiding behind armor and protocol. "Leave us," Sarathra said to the guards. "My lady?" "I said leave us. Wait by the lift." The guards exchanged a look but bowed and retreated down the hall. Sarathra looked back at Jace. "What is your name?" "Jace," he said. "Jace Miller." "Well, just Jace. Miller is the guy I work with." "Jace," Sarathra repeated. The name felt strange on her tongue, short and blunt compared to the flowing vowels of her own language. "You are fortunate I am not who the stories say I am." Jace shrugged, finally starting to write his card. "I do not know. The stories say you breathe fire. I do not see any smoke, just—" He paused, risking a glance at her eyes. "Just a lot of sadness." Sarathra drew a sharp breath. She should have him arrested for insolence. She should walk away. Instead, she reached out and plucked a floating sphere of blue fluid from the air. It popped on her gloved finger. "Clear the floor. Jace," she said softly. "Before someone important trips." She stepped around him, her cape brushing against his leg, and walked away down the corridor. She did not look back, but for the first time that day, her hands had stopped shaking. That night, the guest quarters of the consulate were silent. The room was a palace of silk and dark metal, overlooking the endless storm of the gas giant. Sarathra sat on the edge of her bed. She had removed her armor. She wore a simple robe of shifting gray fabric. She held a glass of strong Dravari wine, but she had not taken a sip. She was replaying the collision in her mind. It was absurd. A janitor, a human janitor. He had smelled of cheap soap and sweat. He had been clumsy and foolish. And yet, for the 10 seconds she had stood there looking at him, she had not thought about Kaelor. She had not thought about the council or the assassination or the looming war. She had just been a woman standing in a hallway, dealing with a clumsy boy. She resented it. She resented that her grief, which felt like a holy monument, had been interrupted by something so mundane. She resented that his brown eyes had seen through her defenses so easily. She took a sip of the wine. It tasted bitter. 5 levels down, in the cramped maintenance tunnels that ran like arteries through the station's hull, the air smelled of recycled ozone and grease. Jace sat on a crate, eating a protein bar that tasted like sawdust. Miller was sitting opposite him, working on a fuse box. I am telling you, stay away from the dragon nobility, Miller said, waving a screwdriver for emphasis. You are lucky she did not vaporize you on the spot. I heard a story about a guy on Station 4 who spilled a drink on a Dravari Duke. They turned him into ash and swept him up with his own broom. She was not like that, Jace said, chewing slowly. Oh, she was not? She is the widow of Warlord Kalor. Kid, she has probably killed more people than you have met. Maybe, Jace said. He thought about the way her hand had trembled. He thought about the gold light in her eyes that had dimmed when he asked if she was okay. She did not seem like a monster. Miller. She just seemed lonely and sad, like she was carrying the whole ceiling on her shoulders. Miller snorted. Yeah, well, let her carry it. You stick to carrying the mop. High-level politics is a good way to get your head blown off. Jace crumbled the wrapper of his protein bar and tossed it into the recycler. He picked up his data pad and scrolled through the newsfeed again. He found a picture of Sarathra from the funeral. She looked imperious, terrifying, but he knew what he had seen. The station rotated slowly, turning its face toward the distant sun. High in the spire, Sarathra stood before the transparent hull. The lightning storms on the gas giant below were violent, beautiful scars of light against the darkness. She placed her hand against the cold glass. Her reflection stared back, a powerful, alien queen, alone in the universe. I already lost my warlord husband, she whispered to the empty room. I will not lose my empire too. Far below her feet, in the curved underbelly of the station, Jace pushed his cleaning cart along the quiet corridor. The wheels squeaked, a rhythmic, lonely sound. He put his earbuds back in, turned up the music, and started to hum a melody, trying to drown out the silence of space. The artificial gravity on Axis 9 did not fail often, but when it did, the stomach churned before the lights even flickered. It started as a subtle lightening of the steps, a sensation like cresting a hill in a fast ground vehicle. Before the physics of the station lurched violently to the left, Jace was midway through scrubbing the intake vents of Sector 4 when the world tilted. The dirty water in his bucket sloshed up the side in a slow, gelatinous wave, refusing to fall back down. The magnetic soles of his boots locked with a harsh metallic clang, saving him from drifting into the ceiling, but his stomach did a somersault. Around him, the hum of the ventilation fans deepened into a groaning bass note. Hold on to your lunch, Miller's voice crackled over the comms, sounding tinny and distorted. The main gyro is correcting. We are experiencing a station-wide power surge. Jace gripped the handle of his mop as the lights strobed, white, emergency red, then back to the sterile white of the corridor. Gravity slammed back into place with a bone-jarring thud. The water in the bucket splashed down, soaking the cuffs of his trousers. That is the third time this week, Jace muttered, tapping his headset. It feels like the station has a nervous tick. It is worse than a tick, Miller replied. Tech Services is screaming for bodies. They need anyone with a level 3 clearance or higher to look at the sanitation grid. Apparently, the surge fried the logic gates in the waste recycling AI. Get down to the sub-basement. I am a janitor. Miller, Jace said, wringing out his mop. Not a code monkey. You are a janitor who fixes the drones better than the engineers do, Miller shot back. And it is double overtime. Jace abandoned his cart and headed for the service lift. Double overtime was the magic word that could almost make him forget the nausea churning in his gut. The sub-basement of Axis 9 was a cavernous, dimly lit world of pipes, conduits, and humming server banks that smelled of ozone and processed sewage. The sanitation AI, a sprawling localized network responsible for guiding millions of tons of waste and water through the station, was throwing errors that scrolled across the main terminal in jagged red lines. Two harried technicians were arguing over a holographic schematic when Jace arrived. They barely glanced at him. "It is a feedback loop," the taller tech insisted. "The sensors are reading blockage where there is none." Jace ignored them and plugged his battered datapad into a secondary port. He liked the sanitation systems. They were unglamorous, ignored, and vitally important, much like him. He ran a diagnostic not on the hardware, but on the traffic flow of the cleaning drones. He watched the data streams ripple across his cracked screen. The drones were behaving strangely. They were pausing in sectors they had already cleaned, hovering near high-security data conduits for milliseconds before moving on. It looked like a glitch, a stutter in their programming. But Jace knew the rhythm of these machines, and he talked to them. He knew their hum. This was not a stutter, it was a handoff. He isolated a packet of code from a drone in the diplomatic tier. It was disguised as a waste log file, a simple report on how much dust had been vacuumed. But the file size was massive. "Hello," Jace whispered, frowning. "You are heavy for a dust report." He stripped away the header. Underneath the camouflage was a dense, encrypted data packet. Someone was using the cleaning drones as mules. They were piggybacking messages on the sanitation network, letting the trash collection system carry secrets through the most secure checkpoints on the station. Who suspected the garbage man? Who checked the digital footprint of a vacuum cleaner? He felt a cold prickle on the back of his neck. This was not just a smuggler moving credit codes. The encryption was military grade. Jace pulled the datapad free, his heart hammering against his ribs. He needed to tell his supervisor. He needed to tell someone who got paid enough to deal with military-grade problems. 40 levels above, the air in the Dravari consulate was perfumed with the scent of spiced smoke and tension. Sarathra stood in the center of her private receiving chamber. She had dismissed her attendants, needing a moment of silence before the evening's negotiations. The room was shadowed, lit only by the ambient glow of the wall sconces and the starlight filtering in from the viewport. She felt the attack before she saw it. It was a shift in the air pressure, a subtle displacement of atoms that her dragon senses registered as a threat a fraction of a second before her eyes did. The air behind her rippled, like heat rising from pavement. Sarathra spun, her heavy mourning robes flaring. A figure materialized from the empty air not 2 meters away. They were encased in a stealth suit that bent light around them, making them look like a silhouette cut from glass. A blade, long and needle-thin, punched forward toward her throat. Sarathra did not scream. She roared, a sound that started human but ended in the deep, resonant growl of a predator. She caught the assassin's wrist. Her grip was iron. The impact shuddered through her arm, but she held fast. The assassin was strong, unnaturally so, likely enhanced with cybernetics. They twisted, trying to drive the knife down. Sarathra saw the blade clearly. It was dripping with a viscous green liquid. Her nostrils flared, detecting the acrid, sweet scent of Neural X, a toxin synthesized specifically to bind with the unique proteins in Dravari blood. It shut down the nervous system in seconds, locking the victim in a state of agonizing paralysis before death. They knew what she was. They knew how to kill her. "You will not end my line," Sarathra snarled. She channeled the heat simmering in her blood. Her skin glowed with a sudden violent violet light. The temperature in the room spiked. She twisted the assassin's arm, hearing the snap of bone. The assassin made no sound. They dropped the knife and activated a secondary device on their belt. A pulse of concussive force exploded between them. Sarathra was thrown backward, crashing into a heavy obsidian table. The stone shattered. The assassin, using the momentum, scrambled back and activated their stealth field again, dissolving into a blur of motion before diving through the glass of the balcony doors. The room's alarms began to shriek. General Warlord burst through the main doors a second later, his plasma rifle raised, followed by a squad of royal guards. They found Sarathra standing amidst the ruins of the table, her chest heaving, her eyes burning with terrifying golden intensity. "Secure the perimeter," Warlord shouted. "Medic! Get a medic to her grace." "I am unharmed," Sarathra said, her voice shaking with adrenaline and rage. She pointed to the floor where the knife had fallen. The blade lay on the carpet. The green toxin was eating through the fibers, hissing as it dissolved the floor beneath. "Do not touch it," Sarathra commanded. "That poison was made for me." Warlord looked at the smoking blade, his face paling beneath his dark scales. "This was not a random act," Warlord said quietly. "No," Sarathra replied, staring at the shattered balcony where the assassin had vanished. "It was an execution, and they missed. The lockdown was immediate and chaotic. Blast doors slammed shut across Axis 9, severing the human sectors from the Dravari wing. Red warning lights bathed the corridors, turning the sleek station into a claustrophobic cage. In the command spire, the accusations began before the dust had settled. It was a human stealth tech signature, a Dravari captain shouted, slamming his fist onto the council table. "We tracked the distortion field. It matches coalition prototypes." "And the toxin?" a human admiral countered, his face flushed. "That formulation requires rare isotopes only found in the Dravari home systems. Do not try to pin your internal power struggles on us. This is a succession crisis, plain and simple." Sarathra sat at the head of the table, her face a mask of stone. She had changed out of her torn robes into her battle armor. The black steel gleamed under the harsh lights. "Enough," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the shouting like a blade. The room fell silent. "I was attacked in a diplomatic sanctuary," Sarathra said. "The assassin bypassed sensors that should be impenetrable. I want full access to the station's security logs, every camera, every sensor, every maintenance drone feed from the last 6 hours." The human station commander, a woman named Director Holloway, stiffened. "That is impossible. Lady Sarathra, we cannot grant a foreign military power unrestricted access to our surveillance grid. It is a matter of jurisdiction. We will conduct our own investigation." "Jurisdiction?" Sarathra stood up. Her chair scraped loudly. "Someone tried to murder a head of state on your watch. Director, if you deny me access, I must assume you are hiding something." "I am hiding nothing but the privacy of my citizens," Holloway said, crossing her arms. "You will get the redacted reports, just like everyone else." Sarathra stared at her for a long moment. The mistrust in the room was palpable, a physical weight. The alliance her husband had died for was fracturing, just as the assassin intended. "Very well," Sarathra said coldly. "Keep your jurisdiction. I will find the truth my own way." Down in the maintenance sector, Jace was staring at his datapad when the priority alert pinged. It was a code red maintenance request from the Dravari wing, Sector 7, Corridor B, hazardous material spill. The text read, "Unknown composition, urgent cleanup required." Jace sighed. The lockdown had frozen most civilian traffic, but janitors, apparently, were essential personnel. Even in a crisis, someone had to mop the floor. He grabbed his heavy-duty hazardous materials kit and headed for the service tram. The corridors were empty, patrolled by nervous security drones. He flashed his clearance badge at a checkpoint, and the Dravari guards waved him through with suspicious glares. Sector 7 was near the scene of the attack. The air here still smelled of burnt electronics and fear. Jace found the location of the request. It was a service corridor running parallel to the main diplomatic suite. The damage was subtle but nasty. A section of the floor plating and the lower bulkhead had been melted. It did not look like fire damage. The metal had slumped like warm wax, the edges bubbling with a sickly yellow residue. Jace knelt, activating the scanner on his multi-tool. Corrosive, he muttered, highly acidic. But thermal too? He pulled a pair of reinforced tongs from his belt and carefully peeled a flake of the residue from the wall. It was still warm. He dropped it into a containment vial. It looked like the result of a plasma discharge mixed with some kind of organic acid. He had cleaned up industrial accidents, reactor leaks, and biolab spills, but he had never seen anything that ate through Durasteel this way. So much for floor wax, Jace said to himself. This is going to need a patch job. You talk to yourself often. Human? The voice came from behind him, smooth and dangerous. Jace jumped, nearly dropping the vial. He spun around, scrambling to his feet. Sarathra was standing 10 feet away, watching him. She was fully armored, her helmet held under her arm. In the dim light of the service corridor, her eyes seemed to glow. She moved with a silent grace that defied the weight of the metal she wore. Jace instinctively started to bow, then stopped, remembering their last encounter. He straightened up, clutching the vial to his chest. Hazard pay, right? Jace said, his voice cracking slightly. Talking to myself is cheaper than therapy. Sarathra tilted her head. A small, dry smile touched her lips. It changed her face completely, softening the severe lines of her grief. Therapy is expensive, she agreed. And hazard pay implies you are in danger. Are you? Jace looked at the melted wall, then back at the dragon woman who could probably snap him in half with one hand. I am standing next to a wall that got melted by acid plasma, talking to a warlord who just survived an assassination attempt, Jace said. I would say the hazard level is pretty high. Sarathra stepped closer. She looked at the damage on the wall. Her expression darkened. This is where the assassin vented their stealth heat sink, she murmured. The overload caused the discharge. She looked at Jace. You are examining the floor again. Do you ever look up? Force of habit, Jace said. The floor tells you everything. People lie. Ceilings lie. But the floor keeps the score. He held up the vial. I grabbed a sample. I was going to run it through the chem analyzer in the janitor's closet. See what kind of solvent I need to clean it. Sarathra's eyes locked onto the vial. That residue could contain trace elements of the assassin's technology. The council's investigators missed this corridor entirely. They were busy arguing about jurisdiction, Jace said. Sarathra let out a short, sharp sound that might have been a laugh. You are observant. Jace Miller. And impertinent. General Valor rounded the corner, his heavy boots clanking. He stopped abruptly when he saw Sarathra standing close to the human janitor. My lady, Valor said, his voice stiff. We are moving the secure perimeter. You should not be in the service corridors. It is unsafe. I am perfectly safe. Valor, Sarathra said, not looking away from Jace. It is optics. My lady, Valor pressed, lowering his voice. The council is already whispering that you are distracted, that your grief has made you vulnerable. Consorting with the human underclass, it gives your enemies ammunition. They will say you have lost your dignity. Sarathra's smile vanished. Her face returned to the mask of the widow regent. My dignity is not so fragile that it breaks in the presence of a worker, she said coldly. But you are right. We have a council session to attend. She turned to Jace. Keep that vial safe. Janitor, do not clean this spot yet. Leave it as a monument to their incompetence. She swept past him, her cape brushing his arm. Jace watched her go, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The council session 3 hours later was a battlefield of bureaucracy. Holographic spreadsheets floated above the central table, displaying the joint defense budget. Sarathra sat in silence, listening to the drone of the finance minister. They were discussing the allocation of funds for the coming quarter, and due to the unexpected maintenance costs on the border relays, we are shifting 2% of the research grant to infrastructure, the minister said. Sarathra watched the numbers scroll. It was a blur of credits and percentages. But something caught her eye. There was a line item for biomedical research, joint initiative. It had been drained. The funds were redirected to a generic holding account labeled Waste Management Logistics. Sarathra frowned. Why would millions of credits for medical research be moved to waste management? She leaned forward, tapping the controls to expand the data. The record flickered. It had been scrubbed. The destination of the funds was hidden behind a layer of digital noise. But the pattern of the scrub, it was rhythmic, repeating loops of code. She remembered the janitor. Jace, the drones are behaving strangely. It is a feedback loop. He had mentioned waste system data loops. He had said the floor tells you everything. The money for the neural toxin research, the toxin that had almost killed her, had been hidden in the same place the assassin's communications were likely hiding. The sanitation network. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The conspiracy was not just military. It was administrative. It was embedded in the infrastructure of the station itself, hiding in the dirtiest, most overlooked corners of their world. Sarathra stood up abruptly. "My lady?" the minister asked. "I am unwell." Sarathra lied smoothly. "I require a recess." She did not go to her quarters. She tapped her comlink, opening a channel to her personal guard. "Find the human janitor, Jace Miller. Bring him to my private strategy room, immediately. And Valor, do not let anyone see you do it." Jace was halfway through a dehydrated noodle bowl when 2 Dravari guards in full stealth armor materialized in the doorway of the break room. "Come with us," one of them rumbled. Jace dropped his fork. "I did not do it, whatever it is. And if this is about the unauthorized break, I have a union rep. Move," the guard said. They escorted him through back hallways and service elevators he did not even know existed, bypassing the checkpoints. They brought him to the upper spire, to a set of heavy blast doors that looked like they could stop a meteorite. The doors hissed open. The room inside was bathed in dim crimson light. It was filled with floating holographic maps of the sector, spinning slowly in the air. Sarathra stood by the main display. She had removed her heavy chest armor and the thermal cape. She wore only the undersuit, a flexible, skin-tight fabric that left her arms and upper chest bare. Jace stopped breathing. Without the armor, the alien nature of her physiology was undeniable and breathtaking. Scales, iridescent and shimmering like opals, ran along her collarbones and down her arms, disappearing into the suit. Her skin was a map of faint, bioluminescent veins that pulsed with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. She looked powerful, predatory, and undeniably female. She turned to face him. The red light cast shadows across her sharp cheekbones. "Come in." "Jace," she said. Jace stepped forward, his legs feeling like jelly. He tried to look at her face, but his eyes kept drifting to the shimmering scales on her shoulders. He realized he was staring. He forced himself to look at the floor, his cheeks burning with a sudden, hot flush. "My lady," he mumbled. I... I did not expect... You did not expect to see the monster out of its shell? Sarathra asked. She moved closer. Jace looked up. No, I did not expect you to be... real. Sarathra paused. She saw the flush on his cheeks. She saw the way his pupils dilated. It was not fear. It was attraction. A raw, clumsy human reaction to her presence. For a heartbeat, a strange sensation curled in her stomach. She was a warlord's widow. She was a political object, a strategic asset, a target. But in this boy's eyes, she was simply a woman standing in a room. It was terrifying. It was intoxicating. She cleared her throat, pushing the feeling down. I brought you here because you see things. Jace, you see things that my council, my guards, and my enemies ignore. She gestured to the holographic map. I found a financial discrepancy. Funds moving into the sanitation network. I believe it is connected to the data loops you found. Jace blinked, his brain slowly coming back online. The ghost packets? Yes. I need you to trace them. I need you to find where that money went, and where those messages are going. Jace took a step back. Whoa. Wait. You want me to hack the station's financial grid? Lady, I clean toilets. If I get caught doing that, they not just fire me, they will airlock me. They will not catch you, Sarathra said, because you will be working for me. She stepped closer, invading his personal space. Her scent, ozone and exotic spices filled his head. I will pay you triple your current wages paid into an off-world account that the debt collectors cannot touch. And I will grant you personal protection under my house seal. Jace hesitated. Triple wages. That was freedom. That was a ticket off this station. But the danger... Why me? He asked. You have spies. You have cyber warfare suites. My spies are compromised, Sarathra said, her voice dropping to a whisper. My counsel is leaking like a sieve. I need someone outside the system. I need a janitor. Jace looked at the map, then at her. He saw the desperation hidden behind her golden eyes. She was powerful, yes, but she was cornered. Triple wages? Jace asked. And a bonus if we survive, Sarathra added. Jace sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. I am going to regret this. Okay. Where do we start? The next 4 hours were a blur of awkward collaboration. Jace sat at the sleek obsidian terminal, his feet barely touching the floor, while Sarathra paced behind him like a caged tiger. The culture clash was immediate. Why do you tap the screen like that? Sarathra asked, frowning. It is a haptic interface. You do not need to strike it. It is an old habit, Jace muttered, typing furiously. Human tech works better if you show it who is boss. Percussive maintenance? Barbarians, Sarathra murmured, but there was no malice in it. Later. Jace paused to stretch, his back cracking. Do you guys ever relax? You have been pacing for 2 hours. You are making me nervous. A warlord does not relax when the enemy is inside the gates, Sarathra said. Well, the enemy is encrypted behind a 7-layer firewall, Jace said. So take a load off. You are vibrating. Sarathra stopped. She looked down at herself. She was indeed vibrating. A low-frequency tremor of tension running through her muscles. She pulled a chair over, a high, rigid throne-like seat, and sat down. Better? She asked. Much, Jace said. Now, explain to me why your financial codes use base 12 math. It is giving me a headache. It is based on the 12 moons of the homeworld, Sarathra explained, leaning in to point at the screen. Here, this glyph represents the lunar cycle. It acts as a variable. They worked into the night cycle. The station slept around them, but in the red-lit room, a strange bubble of intimacy began to form. They were two outcasts, one by choice, one by circumstance, trying to solve a puzzle that could kill them both. At one point, the terminal locked up, refusing to bypass a particularly stubborn human security protocol. "Move over," Sarathra said. "I will override it with a command key." She leaned over him, her arm brushing against his shoulder. Jace froze. The contact was electric. Her skin was warm, radiating a heat that was higher than a human's. He could feel the strength in her arm, the solid weight of her presence. Sarathra felt it too. The human was soft, fragile, yet his shoulder was steady. She smelled the faint chemical tang of his soap, a humble, grounding scent. For a moment, neither of them moved. They stared at the flickering screen, acutely aware of the point where their bodies touched. The silence stretched, heavy and filled with unspoken questions. Then the screen beeped. "Access. Granted." Sarathra pulled back abruptly. "We are in," she said, her voice slightly breathless. Jace exhaled, realizing he had been holding his breath. "Yeah, we are in." He pointed at the screen, his hand shaking slightly. "Look at the routing, the data packets. They are not going to the diplomatic servers, and they are not going to the trash compactors." He traced the line with his finger. "They are routing to docking Bay 94. Sarathra frowned. "Bay 94 is restricted. It is used for classified maintenance and Black Ops transfers." Jace tapped a few more keys. "And look at the timestamp. A transfer is scheduled for tonight, in 1 hour. Sarathra stared at the coordinates. The conspiracy was not just a few corrupt officials. It was a joint operation, humans and Dravari, using the station's Black Ops infrastructure to move weapons, money, and toxins right under the noses of the Council. "We have them," Sarathra whispered. "Not yet," Jace said, standing up. He felt a surge of adrenaline that had nothing to do with fear. "Now we know where they are. But if we want to prove it, we have to go down there." Sarathra looked at him. The janitor was gone. In his place was a partner. "Get your kit." "Jace," she said, a fierce light returning to her eyes. "We are going to inspect the plumbing." The courier ship Voidrunner sat in the shadow of the heavy cruiser docking clamps, a sleek needle of matte black composite among the bloated freight haulers. It was a vessel designed for speed and discretion, unregistered on the public manifests, a ghost ship kept by the Warlord's estate for off-book diplomacy. Sarathra stood at the airlock interface, her hand hovering over the biometric scanner. The air in the docking bay was cold and smelled of recycled engine coolant. She took a breath that did not quite fill her lungs. To access this ship was to invoke the dead. "Authorization," the ship's automated voice requested. It was cool, synthetic, and painfully familiar. Kaelor had programmed the voice himself. Sarathra closed her eyes. "Command override. Kaelor 01, Protocol Ash." The system paused. For a terrifying second, Sarathra thought the codes had been purged, that her husband's killers had erased even this small back door. Then, the locking clamps hissed and released with a heavy metallic thud. "Identity confirmed," the voice said. "Welcome home. Lady Sarathra." She stepped inside, the lights flickering on in sequence down the narrow corridor. Behind her, Jace Miller dragged a heavy duffel bag over the threshold, looking around with wide, nervous eyes. He was wearing a flight suit that he had scrounged from surplus. The sleeves rolled up twice to fit his arms. "So," Jace said, dropping the bag with a clatter, "I guess this is it. I have been promoted." Sarathra turned, her face illuminated by the soft blue running lights of the ship. You are listed on the manifest as the system's custodian. It is a necessary fiction. If we are hailed, you are essential crew. Right, Jace said, rubbing the back of his neck. Systems custodian. Basically a galactic plumber. I fix the pipes while you fly the spaceship. It is just like my old job, except if I screw up here. I explode in a vacuum instead of just getting yelled at by a supervisor. Your familiarity with the infrastructure of Axis 9 is the only reason we found the anomaly, Sarathra said, her voice serious. You are not baggage. Jace, you are the only person I can trust who is not on a payroll I cannot see. She moved toward the cockpit. Secure the hatch. We launch in 4 minutes. Jace watched her go, the long line of her back rigid with tension. He hit the seal button, and the airlock spun shut, locking them into the silence of the ship. He did not see the small red light blinking on a sensor node high in the docking bay rafters outside, transmitting a silent pulse to a receiver halfway across the station. The launch was not the smooth, regulated departure of a commercial flight. Sarathra flew like she fought, decisive, aggressive, and with a terrifying amount of power. She burned hard out of the station's gravity well, ignoring the traffic control warnings that lit up the comms panel. The Void Runner was designed to outrun interceptors, and she pushed the engines to the red line until the station was just a bright star fading behind them. Their destination was Virex 7, the mining moon where the official report said Warlord Kalor had died in a tragic reactor accident following a skirmish. It was 3 sectors away, a journey that would take 12 hours at high warp. 2 hours in, the smooth hum of the slipstream drive changed to a jagged, vibrating growl. Jace was in the galley, trying to heat up a packet of ration stew, when the ship shuddered violently. A mug slid off the magnetic table and shattered on the floor. "What was that?" Jace yelled, grabbing the counter to steady himself. "Come to the bridge." Sarathra's voice came over the intercom. "There is something you should see." Jace made his way forward, fighting the swaying deck. When he entered the cockpit, the view screen stopped him cold. The stars were gone. In their place was a kaleidoscope of broken light. Space itself seemed to be fractured, huge shards of violet and black shifting against each other like tectonic plates of glass. It was beautiful and nauseating. The ship was weaving through the gaps in reality, the hull groaning under the gravitational shearing. "What is this?" Jace whispered, gripping the back of the pilot's chair. "This is the rift scar," Sarathra said. Her hands flew across the controls, making micro-adjustments to keep them from being torn apart. 100 years ago, my people tested a weapon here, a singularity cannon. It was meant to end a war. Instead, it broke the local physics. She looked at him, her golden eyes reflecting the jagged light outside. "Humans call us monsters. Jace. They call us the Dragon Warlords because of our armor and our physiology. But this is why they truly fear us. Because we once had the power to break the sky, and we used it." Jace looked out at the scarred universe. "It looks painful," he said, "like a wound that won not close." "That is what an empire is," Sarathra said softly. "A series of wounds that we call history." Suddenly, the ship lurched hard to starboard. The artificial gravity generator flickered and cut out. For a second, they were weightless. Jace drifted upward, his boots leaving the deck. Then, with a crack of ozone, the gravity slammed back on, but at a 45-degree angle. Jace was thrown across the small cockpit. He tumbled toward the navigation console, flailing for a handhold. Sarathra moved with the blurring speed of her species. She unbuckled and spun out of the pilot's chair, intercepting him before he could smash his head against the metal. They collided in the narrow aisle between the seats. Jace's back hit the bulkhead, and Sarathra slammed into him, pinning him against the wall to stop his momentum. The emergency lights bathed them in a dim, pulsing amber glow. The ship was vibrating around them, correcting its orientation. For a long, breathless moment, nobody moved. Jace gasped, the air knocked out of him. His hands had instinctively come up to brace himself, and they were resting on Sarathra's waist. The material of her undersuit was warm, far warmer than a human body, radiating a heat that seeped through his palms. Sarathra's hands were pressed against the wall on either side of his head. Her claws extended, digging into the padded metal. Her face was inches from his. He could see the intricate flecks of color in her irises, the way her slit pupils widened in the low light. He could smell the scent of her, ozone, hot metal, and something uniquely organic, like dry desert sand. "Are you injured?" she asked. Her voice was low, a rumble in her chest that he felt against his own. I am good," Jace stammered. "Thanks for the catch." He was acutely aware of where his hands were. He knew he should move them. He was touching a warlord, a creature of high nobility, in a way that would probably get him executed in any other context. But his fingers refused to lift. The curve of her waist felt solid, powerful, and terrifyingly real. Sarathra did not pull away. She looked down at him, her gaze traveling from his wide eyes to his mouth, then back up. Her throat scales flared slightly, a biological reaction she could not suppress. Flushing a deeper violet, she felt the frantic beat of his human heart against her chest. It was fast, fragile, a bird trapped in a cage. The desire hit her like a physical blow, unwanted, inappropriate, and sharp. She wanted to lean in. She wanted to bridge the tiny gap between them and taste the fear and the fascination on his breath. The ship leveled out, the gravity realigned with a hum. The moment stretched, taut as a wire. Then Jace blinked, his face flushing crimson. He pulled his hands away as if he had been burned. "Sorry," he said, ducking under her arm and scrambling toward the co-pilot seat. "Sorry. Gravity. It is slippery." Sarathra stayed against the wall for a second longer, her claws leaving 4 deep gouges in the metal. She took a breath, forcing her heart rate to slow, forcing the heat beneath her skin to recede. "Slippery," she repeated. "Yes." She slid back into the pilot's chair, her back rigid. The silence in the cockpit was thick enough to choke on. Jace was staring studiously at a blank monitor, his ears burning red. To break the tension, Jace cleared his throat loudly. "You know, this reminds me of the time I had to clean the Zero-G officers' lounge after Admiral Halloway's retirement party," he said, his voice high and fast. Sarathra glanced at him. "Is that so?" "Yeah," Jace continued, desperate to fill the air. "Apparently, the Admiral thought it would be funny to disable the gravity and open 20 bottles of champagne at the same time. Do you know what happens to champagne in Zero-G? It turns into a million tiny, sticky bubbles that float everywhere. I spent 6 hours chasing balls of alcohol with a vacuum hose. I looked like I was bobbing for apples in invisible water." He mimed the motion, looking ridiculous and frantic. Sarathra watched him. The image of this small human janitor swimming through the air, chasing floating wine while cursing an admiral, was so absurd, so utterly removed from the grim reality of their mission that a sound escaped her throat. It started as a huff, then grew into a deep, resonant laugh. It was a rusty sound, something that had not been used in a long time. She threw her head back, her shoulders shaking. Jace stopped miming and smiled, a genuine, crooked grin. "There it is," he said softly. Sarathra wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. "You are ridiculous, Jace Miller." "Maybe," Jace said. "But I got the room clean, and I stole a bottle of the good stuff for my trouble." Sarathra looked at him, the amusement softening her sharp features. Kaelor used to say that laughter was a tactical error. It wastes oxygen. Jace shrugged. "Maybe. But it keeps you from suffocating." Virex 7 was a tomb. The moon hung in the black sky like a bruised eye, its surface scarred by centuries of aggressive strip mining. There was no atmosphere, only a thin, clinging electrostatic dust that coated everything in gray silence. Sarathra landed the Void Runner in a crater 2 kilometers from the crash site. They suited up in silence. Sarathra wore her full battle plate, the helmet sealing with a hiss. Jace wore a reinforced heavy-duty environmental suit he had found in the ship's locker. It was bulky and orange, making him look like a traffic cone next to her sleek black armor. They walked across the surface, the magnetic boots thumping rhythmically against the rock. The wreckage of the Iron Wing loomed ahead of them. It was massive, a mountain of twisted metal and scorched hull plating. The ship had broken into 3 main sections. The spine of the vessel snapped like a dry twig. It lay half buried in the dust, a dead dragon of steel and ceramic. Sarathra stopped at the edge of the debris field, through the comms. Jace heard her breathing hitch. "This is where he died," she whispered. "We will find out why," Jace said. He moved forward, scanning the hull with his multi-tool. The main airlock was fused shut, melted by the heat of the explosion. But Jace knew infrastructure. He knew that every ship, no matter how big or how military, had to breathe, and it had to excrete. "Over here," Jace said, pointing to a jagged tear in the lower fuselage. "That is the tertiary waste expulsion port. It leads directly into the recycling subgrid. It is tight, but I can fit." "You want to crawl into the sewer of my husband's flagship?" Sarathra asked, her voice skeptical. "It is the only way in that is not blocked by 20 tons of slag," Jace said. "Besides, nobody guards the sewer." He was right. Jace shimmied through the wreckage, pulling himself along the narrow, freezing ducts. Sarathra followed, her armor scraping loudly against the walls. It was a tight squeeze for her, and Jace had to help clear debris, his smaller frame allowing him to navigate the crushing darkness. They emerged into a secondary engineering bay that had miraculously held its seal. Emergency lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. Jace moved immediately to the large cylindrical tanks that lined the far wall, the waste recycling unit. He ran his scanner over the ruptured plating. "Look at this," he said, his voice echoing in the dead ship. Sarathra stepped closer. "What am I looking at?" "The blast pattern," Jace said. He pointed to the way the metal was peeled back. If the reactor had overloaded, the force would have come from the engine room, pushing outward. "But look at these scorch marks." The force came from inside the cycling unit. He shone his light into the ruptured tank. Fused to the inner wall was a fragment of a device, a small, innocuous-looking box. It was a shaped charge, Jace said. Small, precise. They planted it in the waste cycler. When the system purged, it triggered the chain reaction that cracked the containment field. Sarathra stared at the burnt metal. It was so small, so mundane. "They killed a warlord with a garbage bomb," she said, her voice trembling with fury and disbelief. "He conquered systems. He negotiated treaties that saved billions, and they killed him through the plumbing." "It is smart," Jace said quietly. "It is the one place nobody looks. It is invisible because it is beneath notice, just like Just like a janitor, Sarathra finished. She turned away, pacing the tilted deck. It is an insult, a final spitting insult to his legacy. We have to keep moving, Jace said. The command deck, if he knew anything, it will be in his personal logs. The command chamber of the Iron Wing was a cathedral of destruction. The viewport was shattered, open to the vacuum, but the emergency force fields were still holding the atmosphere and shimmering with a faint blue haze. The Warlord's throne sat in the center, twisted and scorched. Sarathra approached it slowly. She reached out, her gauntlet touching the armrest. She keyed in a sequence on the hidden console beneath the seat. Access personal log. Authorization Sarathra. A hologram flickered to life. It was distorted, ghost-like, but the face was unmistakable. Warlord Kalor. He looked tired, his eyes heavy. Sarathra. The recording spoke. The voice was deep, weary. If you are seeing this, then the shadows have finally caught me. I do not have much time. I have found the rot. It is not the humans, it is us. It is our own scales. The Ember Concord. They are real. They are in my council. They are in the Alliance High Command. They want the war to continue because peace is bad for business. The image flickered violently. Trust no one, Kalor said. Not Valor, not the council. Build a new path. My heart. Do not let them turn you into a weapon of revenge. I love... The recording cut out with a harsh burst of static. Sarathra stood frozen. The silence of the dead moon rushed back in. Our own scales, she whispered. The armor seemed to fall away from her spirit. She was not the dragon woman. She was a widow standing in the grave of the man she loved, realizing that the people she had eaten with, the people she had defended, had murdered him for profit. A sound tore from her throat, a keening, high-pitched wail of pure anguish. Her controls snapped. Wings of pure, blinding, bioluminescent light erupted from her back, passing through the physical armor as if it were mist. Her skin turned a violent, burning violet. The temperature in the room skyrocketed. The metal floor beneath her boots began to glow red. Sarathra! Jace yelled, shielding his eyes from the glare. She did not hear him. She was drowning in the fire. She fell to her knees, her claws digging into the deck, her whole body shaking with the force of the energy pouring out of her. She was becoming a supernova of grief. Jace knew he should run. The radiation coming off her was enough to blister skin. But he saw the woman inside the light. He saw the way her shoulders shook. He moved forward. Sarathra, look at me! He reached her. The heat was intense, singing the eyebrows of his faceplate, triggering the cooling alarms in his suit. He dropped to his knees in front of her. He grabbed her shoulders. Through the thick environmental suit, he could feel the vibration of her power. Sarathra, you are going to overload. I failed him, she screamed, her voice distorted by the energy field. I was blind. I let them kill him. You did not know, Jace shouted back. He gripped her tighter, shaking her. You are not a god. Sarathra, you are just a person. You cannot control everything. He pulled her toward him. Grief is not failure, he yelled. It is just love with nowhere to go. Do not let it burn you out. The words seemed to pierce the storm. Sarathra looked up, her eyes burning white. She saw his face behind the orange helmet, scared, sweating, but fierce. He was holding on to her like she was the only solid thing in the universe. The wings of light flickered. The blinding glare softened to a dull glow. She collapsed forward. Jace caught her. He sat on the ruined deck of the command ship, holding the most dangerous woman in the galaxy in his arms. She was sobbing now. Great racking heaves that shook her armored frame. He rested his chin on the top of her helmet, rocking her gently. I have got you, he whispered. I have got you. She rested her head against the chest plate of his bulky suit. She could hear his heart beating, rapid and human and alive. She felt a desperate, almost shameful desire to stay there, to hide in the small, warm shadow of this janitor and never have to be the warlord again. How long they sat there, she did not know, but the silence was shattered by a new sound, a screech of metal, the thud of landing clamps. Jace looked up. Through the force field window, he saw 3 dropships descending from the black sky. They were sleek, unmarked, and bristling with weapons. "Drones," Jace said, his voice tight, "and mercenaries." Sarathra pulled back. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but the golden fire was back, cold and sharp. "They followed us," she said. "They are here to finish the job." She stood up, the grief locking away instantly behind the armor of the soldier. "Can you fight?" Jace asked, scrambling up. Sarathra extended her wrist blades. They hummed with plasma. "I am a dragon warlord," she said grimly. "Fighting is the only thing I have left." The chase was a nightmare of noise and dust. They ran through the jagged ore caverns beneath the crash site, the tunnels unstable and crumbling. Behind them, a swarm of hunter-killer drones buzzed like angry hornets, firing laser bolts that slagged the rock around them. Sarathra was a whirlwind of destruction. She did not need a gun. She shifted partially, her throat swelling as she unleashed controlled bursts of plasma breath that melted the drones in mid-air. She tore through a squad of mercenary soldiers in heavy exosuits, her movements too fast for them to track. But there were too many of them. "We need a way out," Sarathra shouted, deflecting a laser blast with her gauntlet. "The mining lift," Jace yelled, pointing to a rusted shaft ahead. "It goes to the upper ridge. The escape pods are there." They sprinted for the lift. A massive, tracked mining hauler blocked the path. "I cannot move it," Sarathra yelled. Jace slid under the chassis. "I can hotwire it. It is standard Union hydraulics." He ripped open a panel, sparking wires together. The massive machine groaned to life. Jace scrambled out as the hauler lurched forward, crashing into the tunnel wall and bringing down a deluge of rock that crushed the pursuing drones. "Go!" Jace screamed. They reached the upper ridge. A row of emergency escape pods from the mining colony sat rusting in their launch cradles. They jammed themselves into the nearest one. It was a sphere barely big enough for 2 people. Jace slammed the hatch shut and punched the launch sequence. External locks engaged. The computer chirped. "Launch in 10 seconds. Outside, the mercenaries were cutting through the door of the airlock ridge. Sparks showered down. "We are not going to make orbit," Sarathra said, her breathing heavy. "They will shoot us down." The pod fired. The G-force slammed them back into the padded seats. They shot up through the thin atmosphere, a tiny speck against the massive moon. Jace looked at her. They were pressed together in the cramped space, their limbs tangled. Her helmet was off now, discarded in the run. Her face was streaked with soot and sweat, her hair wild. She looked magnificent and terrified. The adrenaline was spiking in his blood, the realization that they had just survived, that she was here, that she was real, overwhelmed him. He did not think. He leaned forward and kissed her. It was clumsy. Their noses bumped, but it was fierce. It was a kiss born of terror and the sudden blinding clarity that comes when death is inches away. Sarathra froze. Her claws dug into the metal of the seat beside his head. For a second, a long, impossible second, she kissed him back. She closed her eyes and leaned into him, pressing her mouth against his with a hunger that had nothing to do with war. She tasted the salt on his skin, felt the heat of his life. It was a moment of pure, stolen rebellion against the cold universe. Then the reality of who she was crashed back in. She pulled back abruptly, her breath hitching. "No," she whispered. She stared at him, her eyes wide, her chest heaving. I am sorry, Jace gasped, his face burning. I did not. I belong to a dead warlord, Sarathra said. Her voice was brittle, like cracked glass. I cannot betray his memory, and not now. She turned her head away, staring at the bulkhead. Jace slumped back in his seat. The rejection stung worse than a plasma burn, but he saw the way her hands were shaking. He saw the way she refused to look at him, not because she was angry, but because she was afraid of how much she had wanted it. The pod drifted silently through the void, carrying them back toward their ship. They sat in tense, heavy silence, the taste of the kiss still lingering on their lips, creating a distance between them that felt wider than the rift itself. The flight back to Axis 9 was defined by the silence. It was not the empty, peaceful silence of the void outside the hull, but a heavy, pressurized silence that filled the corridors of the Void Runner. The small crew of automated service drones and 2 loyal Dravari pilots moved through the ship with practiced invisibility, politely pretending not to notice the charged atmosphere between their mistress and the human passenger. Jace sat in the small galley, staring into a cup of lukewarm synthetic coffee. He had not slept since they left the moon. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the phantom sensation of the escape pod, the smell of ozone and sweat, and the terrifying electric softness of Sarathra's lips against his. He felt like an idiot. He was a 24-year-old janitor with a mountain of debt and a cracked datapad, and he had kissed the widow regent of the Dravari Dominion. It was the kind of mistake that usually ended with an execution, not a ride home. The door to the galley hissed open. Sarathra entered. She had cleaned the soot from her face and changed into a fresh undersuit, though she still carried her sidearm strapped to her thigh. She stopped when she saw him, her hand resting on the back of a bolted-down chair. The air in the room seemed to thin, the oxygen replaced by a sudden spike in tension. "My lady," Jace said, standing up too quickly. His knee bumped the table, rattling his cup. "Sit," Sarathra said. Her voice was calm, but there was a tightness around her eyes that had not been there before. "We need to review the data logs before we dock." Jace sank back into his chair. "Right. The logs. Of course." He looked at his hands, scrubbing a smudge of grease off his thumb. "Look, about back there, in the pod." Sarathra stiffened. "We do not need to discuss it. It was a reaction to extreme stress, adrenaline, survival instinct. Is that all it was?" Jace asked. He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Because it felt like a little more than survival to me." Sarathra looked away, staring at the star field shifting past the viewport. Her throat scales flushed a faint, dusty violet. Jace let out a breath he had been holding for 6 hours. "I know who I am. Sarathra. I am a janitor. I fix toilets and scrub floors. You are. I know the gap between us is not just a gap. It is a canyon. And I know you are grieving." His voice cracked, just a little, on the word grieving. "I am not sorry I wanted to kiss you," Jace said quietly. "I am only sorry if I made that canyon harder for you to cross. If I added weight to what you are already carrying. That was not my plan." Sarathra turned back to him. Her eyes were pools of molten gold, swirling with a conflict so deep it looked painful. "You did not add weight." "Jace," she said. Her voice was low, intimate. "You took it away. That is the problem." She walked over to the table and sat across from him, leaning forward. For one moment in that pod, I did not feel like a warlord. I did not feel like a widow or a symbol of my people. I felt alive. I felt like a woman who could choose to simply be. She clenched her hand into a fist on the table. And that is dangerous. In my world, feelings that are not useful for war are weaknesses. They are cracks in the armor where a knife can slip in. If I let myself feel this, if I let myself want this, I become vulnerable. And right now, vulnerability means death. Jace reached out, covering her fist with his hand. His skin looked pale and soft against her scaled knuckles. Then we keep the armor on a little longer, he said. But do not pretend the person underneath does not exist. Sarathra looked at his hand covering hers. She did not pull away. A slow, terrifying warmth spread through her chest. We have work to do, she whispered. They moved to the strategy room, a small chamber dominated by a secure hollow table. Jace plugged in the memory core they had salvaged from Kaelor's ruined flagship. The data streamed into the air, a waterfall of text, audio logs, and financial transactions. It was dense, encrypted, and damning. Jace's fingers flew across the interface. He was in his element here. The systems of the galaxy were just pipes and valves to him, and he knew how to find the leaks. Here, Jace said, isolating a recurring string of code. Kaelor mentions a group called the Ember Concord. Sarathra read the scrolling text. The Ember Concord, a coalition of the willing. Purpose, maintenance of strategic tension. It is a business model, Sarathra said, her voice turning to ice. Look at these revenue projections. They are profiting from the border skirmishes, weapons sales, emergency reconstruction contracts, high-interest loans to destabilized colonies. Jace expanded the file. It gets worse. Look at the roster. These are not just black market smugglers. These are admirals, senators, high-caste nobility. He highlighted a list of names. Several were human, but many were Dravari. I know him, Sarathra said, pointing to a Dravari name. Lord Vok. He sat at my table last week and drank my wine. And her, Admiral Halloway. She commands the human defense fleet in this sector. They are working together, Jace said, shaking his head. Humans and Dravari. While the soldiers on the front lines are killing each other, the people in charge are shaking hands in a back room and counting the money. That is why Kaelor died. Sarathra realized he was going to expose them. He was preparing a peace treaty that would have ended the skirmishes permanently. He was going to turn off the tap of blood money. Jace tapped the screen again. And look at how they are communicating. The encryption algorithm. It is the same one I found in the sanitation drones on Axis 9. He pulled up a map of the station, overlaying the waste disposal network with the military communication hubs. They are the same, Jace said. The Ember Concord has embedded its network into the trash. Every time a cleaning drone docks to upload its log, it is actually transferring data for the conspiracy. It is brilliant. It is invisible. It is everywhere. Sarathra stared at the map. It meant the rot was absolute. There was no safe harbor. If she went to the Human Council, she would be reporting the crime to the criminals. If she went to her own people, she might be speaking to her husband's murderers. The ship's communication console chimed. A priority channel request. It is General Valor. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. He says it is urgent. Code red. Put it through, Sarathra commanded. The hologram of General Valor flickered into existence above the table. He looked harried, his scales dull and grayish, glancing over his shoulder as if he expected to be shot. My lady, Valor said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You must return to Axis 9 immediately. Why? Sarathra asked. What has happened? I cannot speak on this channel, Valor said. The walls have ears. The floor has eyes. Just come back and bring the human. He is relevant. Relevant? Sarathra narrowed her eyes. Valor, if you are part of this, please. Sarathra, Valor interrupted, using her name without the title. A desperate breach of protocol. Just come home. Before they closed the net, the transmission cut dead. Sarathra looked at Jace. The silence returned, but this time it was sharp with danger. He sounded scared, Jace said. General Valor does not get scared, Sarathra said grimly, which means we are walking into a trap. That night, the ship ran silent, drifting toward the station with transponders masked. Sarathra could not sleep. She sat in her quarters, the lights dimmed to a soft amber. The datapad with Kaelor's final log lay on her lap, but she was not reading it. She was remembering the sound of his voice. The door chime rang softly. Come in, she said. Jace stepped inside. He held 2 mugs of hot tea. I figured you were awake, he said. You mourn loudly. I can hear you thinking from the hallway. Sarathra managed a small, tired smile. Is it that obvious? Jace set the tea down and sat on the edge of the opposite bunk. You are staring at that datapad like you are trying to pull him out of the screen. I am trying to remember him, Sarathra admitted. Not the Warlord, not the statue in the Capitol Square, but the man. She picked up the mug, warming her hands. He was funny. Jace. People do not know that. He had a terrible singing voice. He would sing ancient battle hymns while he was cooking, and he would get the words wrong on purpose just to make me laugh. She looked at Jace. He was fierce, yes. But in private, he was gentle. He wanted to build a world where our children would not have to wear armor. That was his promise to me. Jace nodded slowly. He sounds like a good man. He was, Sarathra said. And I miss him. I miss him so much it feels like my chest is hollow. She looked down at the dark liquid in her cup, and that is why I am afraid. Jace. Because when I was with you, for a moment, the hollow place was not so empty, and I felt guilty, as if feeling warmth again was a betrayal of his memory. Jace leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Sarathra, look at me. She raised her eyes. Love does not work like a battery, Jace said softly. You do not use it up, and loving someone new does not erase the dead. It does not mean you forgot him. It just proves that he succeeded. Succeeded? Sarathra asked. He wanted you to live. Did not he? Jace asked. He wanted a future. If you shut down, if you become just a suit of armor with a ghost inside, then the bad guys win. They took his life. Do not let them take yours too. Sarathra stared at him. The truth of his words hit her harder than any plasma bolt. She stood up and crossed the small space between them. Jace stood to meet her. They were inches apart. The air between them hummed with heat. Sarathra could see the pulse in his neck. She could see the honest, terrifying hope in his eyes. She raised her hand. Her claws retracted and cupped his face. Her skin was rougher than his, warmer, alien yet undeniably right. You are a very wise janitor. Jace Miller, she whispered. I watch a lot of soap operas, Jace whispered back, his voice trembling slightly. They leaned in, foreheads touched, breath mingled. It was not a kiss, but it was an embrace of spirits, a shared acknowledgement that they were 2 living things standing on the edge of a precipice, holding on to each other to keep from falling. Sarathra closed her eyes, breathing in his scent. She wanted to close the gap. She wanted to lose herself in him. But the image of Valor's terrified face flashed in her mind. Not yet, she whispered, pulling back just an inch. Her voice was thick with regret. We cannot. Not while the target is on our backs. If I lose focus now, we die, Jace finished. He stepped back, his hands lingering on her arms for a second before dropping. I know. Sarathra took a deep breath, the scales on her neck flaring and settling as she regained control. When this is over, she said, her voice turning hard and commanding, the Warlord will have words with the Janitor. I look forward to the performance review, Jace said, a small grin breaking through the tension. Axis 9 was a fortress when they arrived. The Void Runner slipped into a private hangar using the override codes. Bypassing the blockade of cruisers that now orbited the station, the atmosphere on the docks was suffocating. Armed patrols marched in tight formation. Civilians hurried with their heads down. The air tasted of fear. General Valor met them in the shadow of the ship's landing gear. He was alone, which in itself was terrifying. A general was never alone. My lady, Valor said, bowing low. He looked 10 years older than he had 2 days ago. His armor was scuffed, and his eyes darted nervously to the shadows of the cargo containers. Rise, Valor, Sarathra said. We are here. Now tell us why. Valor reached into his gauntlet and pulled out a small, unassuming data chip. He pressed it into Sarathra's hand. They know you have the flight logs, Valor whispered. They know you went to Virex 7. Who is they? Sarathra demanded. The Concord, Valor hissed. He looked at Jace, then back to Sarathra. I have been compromised. Sarathra, they have footage of me. Old debts. Things I did to protect my family. They blackmailed me into silence. Sarathra's face hardened. You betrayed Kalor. No, Valor pleaded. Never him. I tried to warn him, but they blocked me. I have been trying to feed you information without them seeing. That is why I sent the message. They are making a move. Tonight. What move? Jace asked. Valor tapped the chip in Sarathra's hand. Look at it. Sarathra slotted the chip into her wrist comp. A holographic projection sprang up from her gauntlet. It was a news report, a pre-recorded broadcast, slated for release in 1 hour. The headline screamed in bold, jagged letters, "The Black Widow's Coup." The reporter's voice was grave. Evidence has surfaced today proving that Lady Sarathra, widow of the late Warlord, orchestrated her husband's death to seize sole control of the Dominion. Motivated by power and a secret, illicit affair with a human sympathizer, she sabotaged the flagship. The image changed. It was a photograph, high resolution. It showed Sarathra and Jace in the escape pod. The angle was damning. It showed the kiss. But it was edited, filtered to look sordid, predatory. It made Sarathra look like she was devouring him, and Jace look like a conspirator. Sarathra stared at the image. The blood drained from her face, leaving her scales gray and ash-like. They are going to frame me, she whispered. They are going to use his murder to paint me as a monster. And they are going to use us as the proof of my corruption. If this goes live, Valor said, you will be declared an enemy of the state. The Human Council will revoke your diplomatic immunity. The Dravari clans will hunt you down for honor killing. It is the perfect narrative. The lustful widow and her human pet, conspiring to start a war. Jace looked at the picture. He felt sick. His private, terrified moment of connection had been turned into a weapon to destroy the woman he cared about. They are weaponizing grief, Jace said. And they are weaponizing love. We cannot stop the broadcast, Valor said. It is hardwired into the station's emergency alert system. It goes out to the whole sector in 40 minutes. Sarathra deactivated the hologram. Her hand was shaking, but her jaw was set in a line of granite. If I deny it, they will say I am lying. She said, "If I run, I look guilty. If I fight, I prove them right about my violent nature. It is a checkmate." She looked at Jace. "I should have left you on the station. I have ruined you." "No," Jace said. He was staring at the hangar floor. He was looking at the grates, the drainage, the cables running along the wall. "Jace?" Sarathra asked. "I have an idea," Jace said. His voice was distant, calculating. "We have no time for ideas," Valor snapped. "We need an extraction team." "Shut up, General," Jace said, not looking up. He turned to Sarathra. "The broadcast. Valor said it is hardwired into the emergency system." "Yes," Sarathra said. "And the emergency system shares bandwidth with the station's infrastructure monitoring," Jace said. "Because if there is a fire or a depressurization, the sensors need to trigger the alarms." He looked up, a wild, desperate light in his eyes. "The Ember Concord controls the military channels. They control the news feeds. They control the money. But you know what they do not control." "The plumbing?" Sarathra asked, raising an eyebrow. "The plumbing," Jace grinned. "And the ventilation, and the maintenance override frequency." He pointed to the ceiling. "We cannot stop their signal, and it is too strong, but we can pollute it. We can hijack the feed." "Hijack it with what?" Valor asked. "With the truth," Jace said. "We take Kalor's logs. We take the financial records of the Concord. We take the footage of the assassin, and we dump it all into the emergency stream. But we do not route it through the comms tower. We route it through the waste management nodes." He began to pace, his hands moving as if he were conducting an invisible orchestra. "Every screen on this station, every datapad, every billboard, every smart toilet is connected to the maintenance grid. If I override the safety protocols, I can force every screen on Axis 9 to play our video. You want to broadcast the fall of a government through the sewer network?" Sarathra asked. She stared at him. It was absurd. It was undignified. It was insane. And it was the only thing they would not see coming. "They think they are above us," Jace said, fierce urgency in his voice. "They think they are gods playing chess. They are not looking at the board from the bottom up. They not be watching the janitorial frequency because they think it is beneath them." Sarathra looked at him. She saw the grease on his flight suit. She saw the fire in his eyes. She started to laugh. It was not the polite laughter of court. It was a bark of pure, rebellious delight. "You are suggesting we defeat the most powerful conspiracy in history by throwing garbage at them," she said, a smile spreading across her face that showed all her teeth. "Basically." "Yes," Jace said. Sarathra turned to Valor. The general looked horrified. "And this is highly irregular," Valor stammered. "It is brilliant," Sarathra said. "Valor, give me the encryption keys to the maintenance hub." I do not have them," Valor said, "but I know who does." Jace nodded. "I need a terminal, and I need a hacker, someone who hates the system as much as we do." "I know a guy," Jace said, "down in the lower decks. Name is Sparks. He owes me a favor for not reporting his illegal distillation rig." "And we need muscle," Sarathra said, checking the charge on her plasma pistol. "Because once we start this, they are going to come for us with everything they have." Valor straightened up. "My personal guard is compromised. But there is a unit of Dravari dock workers, veterans of Kalor's third campaign. They have been asking questions. They are loyal. Get them," Sarathra commanded. She turned back to the hologram of the fake news report. She froze the image on the picture of her and Jace. The kiss. She looked at it for a long moment. "The dragon woman lost her warlord husband," she said softly, almost to herself, "and fell in love again with a young human janitor." She looked up at Jace, her eyes burning with a fierce, terrifying resolve. Let them try to use that, she whispered. I will decide what it means. She grabbed her helmet from the rack. Let us go. Jace, she said. It is time to take out the trash. The plan began not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of 1,000 vacuum cleaners, deep within the infrastructure of Axis 9. The sanitation network woke up. It was the graveyard shift, the time when the station's automated cleaning drones usually emerged to scrub floors and recycle air. But tonight, they were carrying a payload heavier than dust. Jace Miller lay on his stomach in a ventilation duct that was barely wider than his shoulders. The metal pressed against his chest, cold and vibrating with the station's pulse. He adjusted his headset, wiping a streak of grease from his forehead. All right, Sparks, Jace whispered. The pigeons are flying, 3 levels down, in a repurposed laundry room. The hacker known as Sparks typed furiously on a terminal built from scavenged parts. I see them. Jace, the code injection is successful. We are riding the trash collection frequency right past their firewalls. It is beautiful, high above in the diplomatic sector. Sarathra walked down the grand concourse. She wore her formal robes over her battle armor, a heavy velvet deception. Her face was a mask of imperious boredom, but her eyes were darting to every shadow, every guard placement. She tapped the comm bead hidden in her ear. Status. Jace. I am at the primary junction. Jace's voice came back, crackling slightly. It is tight in here. I think I just crawled through a nest of wire rats. If I die, tell my mom I was a pilot. Focus, Janitor, Sarathra murmured, nodding politely to a passing Dravari dignitary who bowed low. I am approaching the security hub for Sector 4. I need you to cycle the door codes. On it, Jace said. In the duct, Jace pulled a splicing tool from his belt. He located the bundle of fiber-optic cables running along the ceiling of the shaft. He did not cut them, he clamped a bypass onto them, feeding a loop of false data into the stream. Door cycling in 3, 2, 1. In the corridor, the heavy blast doors to the security hub hissed open. The guards stationed there looked confused, tapping their key cards. System glitch, Sarathra said smoothly, stopping in front of them. She projected an aura of absolute authority. The council has ordered a manual reset. You are relieved for 10 minutes. The human guard frowned. We did not receive orders for a reset. My lady, that is because the communications array is being recalibrated. Sarathra lied, stepping closer. Unless you wish to explain to the High Council why their security audit was delayed by a sergeant who cannot read a situational report. The guard hesitated, then saluted. We will hold the perimeter, my lady. They marched off. Sarathra slipped inside the hub, locking the door behind her. She moved to the main console, her fingers flying across the keys with a speed that belied her size. I am in, she whispered. I am redirecting the internal sensors in the maintenance sector. You have a blind spot for 5 minutes. Jace, move! Jace scrambled forward, his knees bruising against the grating. He dropped out of the vent into a service hallway, landing in a crouch. He sprinted past a patrol of automated sentries that stood frozen, their optical sensors looping a pre-recorded image of an empty hallway thanks to Sarathra's interference. It was a dance of high and low, the Warlord and the Janitor moving in perfect sync. Sarathra charmed and threatened her way through the gilded halls, creating pockets of blindness in the surveillance grid, while Jace scurried through the veins of the station, physically bridging the gaps their digital virus could not cross. General Valor played his part from the barracks. He stood before a holographic map of the station, barking orders to his lieutenants. Report of a toxic leak in the lower quadrants. Valor shouted, pointing to the sectors where the Ember Concord's mercenaries were waiting in ambush. Divert all non-essential personnel to the upper ring. I want a quarantine zone established immediately. But General, a lieutenant protested, that leaves the Central Core exposed. Exactly, Valor thought. Make it happen, he ordered aloud. The plan worked, layer by layer peeling back the defenses of the conspiracy until the target was revealed. It was not a command center. It was a vault, deep in the station's core, hidden behind a nondescript bulkhead labeled Atmospheric Filtration Unit 9. They found it. The Ember Concorde's central node. Jace met Sarathra at the service entrance. He was covered in dust, his flight suit torn at the elbow. She looked pristine, terrifyingly calm. This is it, Jace said, reading the energy signatures on his scanner. The power draw is massive. They are running a supercomputer in there. Sarathra placed her hand on the door. It is shielded and trapped. She pointed to the schematic Jace had pulled up. The vault was not on this level. It was suspended in a gravity well shaft, accessible only by a vertical drop of 50 meters. And the walls of that shaft were lined with nanoblades, invisible filaments of monofilament wire spinning at supersonic speeds, designed to shred anything that touched the sides. It is a meat grinder, Jace said, swallowing hard. We need to get to the terminal at the bottom, Sarathra said. It is the only place we can upload the broadcast. I will go, Jace said. Sarathra turned to him sharply. No, it is too dangerous. I have armor. I can withstand the blades if I slip. Your armor is too heavy, Jace argued, his voice rising. The gravity in that shaft is inverted. If you weigh more than 100 kilos, the repulsion field will not catch you. You will fall straight into the incinerator at the bottom. I am 70 kilos. I can ride the current. I will not let you do it alone. Sarathra snapped. She grabbed his arm. You are a civilian when this is a war zone. I am the only one who fits, Jace shouted, ripping his arm away. Why do you always have to be the shield? Why cannot you just let someone help you because I cannot lose you? Sarathra yelled back. The silence that followed was deafening. The hum of the machinery seemed to fade away. Sarathra stood there, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with the admission. She had spent weeks telling herself it was duty or gratitude or strategy. But the truth was simple and terrifying. I cannot do it again. Jace, she whispered, her voice cracking. I watched Kaylor die. I watched him burn. If I watch you fall down that shaft, I will break. And I will not come back from it. Jace looked at her. He saw the fear that lay beneath the dragon's scales. He saw the woman who had stood in the rain of a dead moon and screamed her grief at the stars. He stepped closer, backing her into a cramped equipment locker lined with vacuum suits. The space was tiny, smelling of rubber and old sweat. You think I am not scared? Jace asked, his voice shaking. I am terrified. I am just a janitor. Sarathra. For my whole life, I have been the guy people walk past without seeing. I am disposable. If a janitor dies, they just hire another one. He reached out, his hands trembling as he cupped her face. His thumbs brushed the iridescent scales on her cheekbones. But you look at me, he said softly. You see me, and I am tired of being safe if it means being invisible. I want to matter. I want to matter to this fight, and I want to matter to you. Sarathra let out a shuddering breath. Her scales shimmered, turning a deep, flushed indigo under his touch. You matter, she whispered. You matter more than the Empire. The distance between them vanished. It was not a tentative kiss. It was a collision. Jace pressed his mouth to hers, and Sarathra responded with a fierce, desperate hunger. Her hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. Her claws retracting, but the strength of her grip bruising his shoulders. It was a kiss that tasted of fear and defiance, a physical promise made in the shadow of death. The universe narrowed down to the heat of their bodies in the dark locker. Sarathra felt the rapid thud of his human heart against her chest, frantic and alive. Jace felt the power radiating from her skin, the alien texture of her lips, the overwhelming reality of her. They pulled apart, gasping for air, their foreheads resting against each other. "Okay," Jace breathed. "Okay. We go together," Sarathra said firmly. Her eyes were burning gold, clear and focused. "I will strip off the heavy plating. I will use the gravity assist harness. But we go together." Jace nodded. Together. They worked quickly. Sarathra unlatched the heavy ablative plates of her battle armor, leaving only the flexible mesh undersuit. She looked vulnerable without the black steel, but her movements were lighter, faster. Jace rigged a tandem harness from climbing gear and maintenance cables. He clipped himself to her back. "Hold on tight," Jace said, checking the carabiners. "And tuck your tail." "I do not have a tail in this form," Sarathra said dryly, though her hands were gripping his forearms tightly. "Figure of speech," Jace muttered. "Ready?" He hit the override on the shaft door. It slid open, revealing a vertical tunnel of swirling air and deadly shimmering light. "Jump!" They leaped into the void. The inverted gravity caught them, a sickening lurch that flipped their stomachs. They did not fall down. They fell up, then sideways, buffeted by the repulsion beams. "Left!" Jace screamed into the comms. The up. Sarathra fired a micro-thruster on her boot, pushing them away from the wall. A bank of nanoblades whirred past inches from their heads, invisible scythes that would have sliced them to ribbons. The descent was a chaotic ballet of physics. Jace called the vectors. He knew the airflow patterns of the station better than the architects did. Sarathra provided the muscle, using her strength to kick off safe points and steer their combined mass through the gauntlet. "Gravity shift! Brace!" They slammed into a magnetic dampening field at the bottom of the shaft, tumbling across the floor of the server vault. They rolled to a stop, tangled in the harness, breathless and bruised. They were alive. The vault was a cold, circular room dominated by a massive column of blue light, the central data core. But standing between them and the console was a nightmare. It was an exosuit, 3 meters tall, built of gleaming white plasteel and gold filigree. It had 2 head cages. Inside the left cage was the pale, sneering face of Admiral Halloway. Inside the right cage was the dark, scaled visage of Lord Vok. Their minds were linked by thick neural cables, their movements synchronized in a grotesque harmony. "How touching." The Admiral's voice boomed from the suit's speakers, overlaid with Vok's deeper growl, "The widow and the worker, falling into our arms." Sarathra stood up, helping Jace to his feet. She unclipped the harness. "Get to the console," she said softly. "What about you?" Jace asked. Sarathra extended her wrist blades. Without her heavy armor, she was faster, but she had no defense against the suit's heavy weaponry. "I will distract them," she said. "Do not miss." "Jace!" She roared, a challenge that shook the walls, and launched herself at the exosuit. The battle was a blur of violence. The exosuit fired a barrage of concussion missiles, but Sarathra was a streak of violet light, dodging, weaving, sliding under the massive metal legs to slash at the hydraulic joints. Jace sprinted for the data core. He slammed his data pad into the primary port. "Access denied," the computer chimed. "Come on," Jace yelled, typing furiously. 7, I need a bridge." He pulled a small cleaning drone, his modified unit, 7, from his pack and jammed its interface lead into the port. The drone beeped happily and began flooding the system with junk data, confusing the firewall. Behind him, Sarathra was fighting for her life. The exosuit swung a massive energy hammer, catching her in the ribs. She flew backward, crashing into a server bank. Pathetic. Lord Vox sneered. You fight like a beast, Sarathra. You have forgotten the dignity of your station. The exosuit projected a hologram into the air above the fight. It was the image of Kalor's death, looped and distorted. Look at him burn. The Admiral laughed. He died screaming, Sarathra, just like you will. Then the image changed. It showed Jace and Sarathra in the escape pod. The kiss twisted into something pornographic and shameful, broadcast on a loop. Is this your legacy? Vox taunted. A traitor to your blood? A whore for a human janitor? Sarathra spat a mouthful of violet blood on the floor. She stood up, her eyes blazing. He is twice the man you are, she snarled. Because he builds. You only destroy. She charged again, leaping onto the exosuit's chest, her claws tearing at the sensor array. Jace ignored the taunts. He ignored the images. He focused on the code. The firewall was crumbling. I am in, Jace whispered. He did not just open a channel. He tore the floodgates off. He linked the stream to the emergency broadcast system. He uploaded everything. Kalor's final log, the financial records of the Ember Concord, the secret recordings Valor had made of the Admiral and Vox planning the assassination. And finally, he patched in the live feed from the vault's own security cameras. Upload complete, the computer said. Across Axis 9, every screen changed. In the mess halls, soldiers stopped eating. In the Grand Council chamber, the diplomats froze as the giant wall screens flickered and showed the live feed. They saw the massive exosuit, they saw the Admiral and the Lord, and they saw Sarathra, bloody and unarmored, fighting with the fury of a goddess. They heard Jace's voice, clear and uncut, narrating the data stream. This is the truth. Jace's voice rang out over the station's speakers. They killed Kalor. They poisoned the peace. And they are trying to kill the only person who gives a damn about any of us. In the vault, the Admiral gasped. The feed! Cut the feed! It is too late! Vox roared. The external nodes are locked. The exosuit stopped fighting. The Admiral and Vox looked at the screens surrounding them, seeing their own faces broadcast to the galaxy. The game was up. The lie was dead. If we burn. Vox screamed. You burn with us. The exosuit's core began to whine. A high-pitched rising frequency. Self-destruct sequence initiated. The suit's computer announced, Jace, Sarathra screamed. She did not run for the door. She ran for him. The exosuit exploded. A wave of thermal energy and shrapnel expanded outward at the speed of sound. Sarathra reached Jace a fraction of a second before the fire did. She spun him around, slamming him against the console, and covered him with her body. She unleashed her full draconic form, not physically shifting but projecting the energy of her spirit. Wings of blinding, solid light erupted from her back, wrapping around them like a cocoon. The blast hit her. Sarathra roared, a sound of pure agony-laced defiance. The fire washed over her back, searing the scales, burning through the mesh suit. She felt her skin blistering, her energy reserves draining to zero. But she did not let go. She pressed Jace's head into her shoulder, shielding him from every joule of the destruction. The blast tore the vault apart, but high above, General Valor slammed his fist onto a button. Emergency containment. The blast doors of the shaft slammed shut, sealing the explosion in the core. The station shuddered, groaned, but held. In the silence that followed, there was only the sound of sparking wires and dripping coolant. Jace pushed himself up. He was unhurt. He looked down. Sarathra lay on the floor. Her back was a ruin of scorched scales and burns. Her wings of light had faded to faint, flickering embers. Sarathra, Jace cried, his voice breaking. He scrambled to her side, pulling her head into his lap. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was shallow. No, no, no. Jace wept. Do not do this. Do not you dare do this. Her eyelids fluttered. The golden eyes opened, dim but present. Did they see? She rasped. Her voice was a dry rattle. They saw. Jace sobbed, stroking her face, not caring about the blood. Everyone saw. You won. We won, she corrected him. She reached up, her hand trembling violently, and touched his cheek. She looked at him with a softness that broke his heart. I am not a warlord right now, she whispered. I am just Sarathra. You are everything, Jace said, fierce tears running down his face. You are the reason for all of it. She smiled, a weak, pained expression. And you are not just a janitor, Jace Miller. You are the one who caught me. Her hand dropped. She fell unconscious, her breathing steadying into a deep, healing rhythm. Jace held her in the wreckage, rocking back and forth as the sound of cutting torches came from the blast doors above. The council chamber was a scene of absolute chaos. The broadcast had ended, but the image remained frozen on the screens, the data files, the proof, the faces of the conspirators. Security forces were storming the podium, arresting the members of the Ember Concord who had tried to flee. The human admiral's aides were being handcuffed. The Dravari nobles who had sided with Vok were surrounded by their own honor guards, weapons drawn against them. But the noise died down as the main doors blew open. Smoke poured into the room. Through the haze, a figure emerged. It was Jace. He was limping, his face streaked with soot and tears. He was supporting Sarathra. She was conscious, though barely. She leaned heavily on him, her scorched back covered by Jace's jacket, but her head was high. She walked with pain, but she walked. The room fell into a stunned silence. The soldiers lowered their weapons. The diplomats stood up. Over the station's speakers, Kalor's voice, triggered by Jace's final hack, began to play. It was the end of his log, the part they had not heard before. Peace is not built on treaties. It is built on the willingness to stand next to someone different than you and say, I will not let you fall. That is the only power that matters. Sarathra stopped in the center of the room. She looked at the council. Then she looked at Jace. She took his hand, intertwining her clawed fingers with his bruised ones. She raised their joined hands in the air. It was not a gesture of victory. It was a statement of fact. The dragon woman and the janitor stood amidst the ruins of the conspiracy, battered, bleeding, and unbroken. Let them look, Sarathra's eyes seemed to say to the galaxy. Let them look, and let them see what real power looks like. The fallout of the Ember Concord did not happen quietly. It happened with the noise of a collapsing star, a shockwave of data and truth that shattered the comfortable silence of the corruption that had held the sector by the throat for a decade. Across a dozen worlds, the arrests began within the hour of Jace's broadcast. The evidence was irrefutable. It was not just names on a list. It was voice logs, biometric data, and financial trails that led from the blood-soaked battlefields of the border skirmishes directly into the private vaults of admirals and high-caste nobility. On the Dravari homeworld, Lord Vok's estate was stormed by his own clan guard, who had viewed the footage of him mocking Sarathra's grief with a collective, burning shame. He was dragged from his high tower in chains, shouting about jurisdiction until the airlock sealed behind him. In the Human Coalition Senate, 3 senior defense ministers resigned in disgrace before the police arrived to escort them out. They tried to spin the narrative, releasing statements about deep cover operations and necessary evils. but their words dissolved against the hard reality of the janitorial logs. The public had seen the truth. They had seen the money intended for medicine flowing into the pockets of warmongers, carried on the back of the very sanitation networks that kept their cities clean. The conspiracy tried to run. Stealth shuttles launched from secret bays and encrypted accounts were hastily purged. But they could not outrun the infrastructure. Every time they tried to use a docking port, a maintenance override locked the clamps. Every time they tried to access a secure server, a sanitation firewall blocked their credentials. The galaxy's janitors, engineers, and maintenance workers, the invisible army that Jace had woken up, were watching. And they were closing the doors. 3 days later, the chaos had settled into a grim, bureaucratic reckoning. Sarathra stood before the Joint Council on Axis 9. The Great Hall was packed. Every seat in the gallery was filled, and millions more were watching via the feeds. She did not wear the black steel of the Warlord. She wore a simple, elegant tunic of deep indigo, the color of a diplomat, though her burns were still bandaged beneath the fabric. She stood in the center of the floor, not as a suspect, but as a witness. Yet the atmosphere was thick with judgment. The council, composed of the survivors who had not been implicated in the Concord, was desperate to regain control. They needed a scapegoat for the indignity of the last week. They could not punish Sarathra for saving the Alliance. So they attacked the one thing they could not understand. "Lady Sarathra," said Councilman Harrows, the same man who had dismissed her concerns weeks ago, "we cannot deny your effectiveness in exposing this cancer. The Coalition owes you a debt." He paused, glancing at the datapad in front of him. "However, we must address the nature of your methods and your associations." The broadcast included imagery that was compromising. Sarathra stood with her hands clasped behind her back. Her posture was perfect, her golden eyes unblinking. "You are referring to the human," she said. Her voice was calm, carrying to the back of the room without amplification. "We are referring to the janitor," Harrows corrected, sneering slightly at the word. "Jace Miller. The footage clearly showed an intimacy that violates the protocols of your station. You are a high widow, a regent. For you to be involved with a laborer of a different species. It raises questions about your judgment. It suggests you were emotionally compromised." Sarathra tilted her head. "You wish to know if my relationship with Mr. Miller affected my decisions?" "We wish to know if you were manipulated," Harrows said, "or if you are simply unstable." "Bring him in," Sarathra said. The councilman blinked. "Excuse me?" "Bring Jace Miller into the chamber," Sarathra commanded. "If you are going to discuss him, you will look him in the eye." The doors at the back of the hall opened. Jace walked in. He looked painfully out of place. He was wearing a borrowed dress uniform that was slightly too tight in the shoulders, and he was trying very hard not to trip on the polished marble floor. He walked past the rows of staring dignitaries, clutching his cap in his hands. He reached Sarathra's side and stopped. He looked at the council, then down at the pristine floor, then back at Harrows. "Nice wax job," Jace said, his voice echoing in the silence. "Little heavy on the polymer sealant in the corners, but I promise I will not track any blue slime on it." A ripple of laughter went through the gallery. It was nervous laughter, but it broke the suffocating tension. Even a few of the Dravari elders cracked a smile. Harrows looked furious. "This is not a joke. Mr. Miller—" Harrows snapped. "No, sir," Jace said, his face sobering instantly. "It is not. I just figure if you're going to interrogate me about my personal life, we should at least be comfortable." Harrows turned his glare back to Sarathra. "This is what I mean. He is irreverent. He is common. And you are a warlord. How can we trust the leader of the Dominion armies when she consorts with the help? Sarathra stepped forward. The movement was small, but it commanded total silence. You ask if my judgment is compromised, she said. I will answer you. She looked at Jace, then turned to face the cameras that were broadcasting to the entire sector. For months, I sat in this room and listened to you talk about honor and treaties. I listened to you speak of power as if it were a currency to be hoarded. And while you talked, a janitor was crawling through the filth of your station to save your lives. She gestured to Jace. You see a worker. You see someone beneath your notice. I see a man who looked at a warlord and saw a person. I see a man who walked into a reactor shaft when the rest of you were hiding in your bunkers. She took a breath, and the scales on her neck shimmered with a soft, inner light. Yes, I have feelings for him. I will not hide them. I will not let you use them as shame. You say love is a weakness? You say it makes me unstable? She shook her head slowly. Grief nearly destroyed me. Losing Kaelor broke the world for me. I was ready to burn everything down, or let it freeze. But love taught me to see beyond the symbols. It taught me that a title means nothing if you are not willing to dirty your hands to protect the people you serve. She looked directly at Harrows. If you want a leader who pretends not to be human, or Dravari, then strip my rank. Take my titles. I do not want them. But if you want someone who has walked through the fire of grief and chosen empathy over revenge, if you want someone who knows that the foundation of an empire is not its throne, but its plumbing, then I will serve. The silence that followed was absolute. Then slowly, a Dravari elder in the front row stood up. He placed his fist over his heart and bowed. Then a human admiral stood, then another. The gallery erupted into applause. It was not polite applause. It was a roar of approval from a public that was tired of secrets, tired of war, and desperate for something real. Harrows looked around the room, realizing he had lost. The scandal he had tried to manufacture had just become a coronation. We accept your terms, Lady Sarathra, Harrows muttered, sitting down. You are cleared of all suspicion. You are recognized as the moral heir to Kaelor's legacy. Thank you, Sarathra said. But I have one more condition. The room quieted. I will not be Warlord, she said. The title implies a war that I intend to end. She looked at Jace, a small smile touching her lips. I petition this council to create a new role. I will be the ambassador of the Rift. My mandate will be joint infrastructure, worker welfare, and transparent defense. I will not command armies. I will build bridges. And I will start by ensuring that the people who clean your floors are paid as well as the people who sit in your chairs. The roar of approval was deafening. Later, outside the chamber, the hallways were bustling with aides and reporters. Jace stood by a window, looking out at the stars. Sarathra approached him. She looked tired, but the weight that had been crushing her for weeks was gone. You did good in there, Jace said, not looking away from the window. Ambassador, it has a nice ring to it. It is better than widow, Sarathra said. She stood beside him. The council has offered you a position, Jace, Director of Station Operations, or, if you prefer, a settlement. Enough credits to buy a private moon. Jace laughed, a short, dry sound. A moon. Yeah, that sounds nice. Quiet. You are hesitating, Sarathra observed. Jace turned to her. Of course I am hesitating. Sarathra, look at you. You are changing the galaxy. You are a legend, and I am. He gestured to his borrowed uniform. I am still the guy who fixes the clogged vents. I do not belong on that stage with you. I nearly tripped walking in there. Today was a nice moment, but tomorrow, people are going to ask why the ambassador is hanging out with the janitor. Sarathra took his arm. Come with me. Where? Just come. She led him away from the crowds, to a private turbo lift. They ascended past the diplomatic suites, past the command deck, all the way to the observation deck at the very top of the spire. It was empty. The room was a bubble of glass suspended in the void, overlooking the swirling storms of the gas giant below and the glittering traffic of the station above. Sarathra let go of his arm and walked to the edge. Do you know why I brought you here? She asked. Because the view is nice? Jace offered. Because up here, you can see everything, she said, but you cannot see the cracks. She turned to face him. Her expression was fierce and tender. You think you are unworthy because you see the dirt, Jace. You think your job makes you small, but without your janitor's eyes, without your stubborn compassion, without your willingness to crawl into the dark places nobody else would touch, the Empire would still be blind, Kaelor would be unavenged, and I would be dead. She stepped closer, invading his personal space, her warmth radiating against him. You say you do not belong on the stage. Then we will change the stage. I do not want a partner who stands in front of the cameras and smiles. I want the man who held me when I was falling apart. I want the man who makes me laugh when I want to scream. She took his hands, his rough, calloused fingers against her smooth, scaled palms. I have been terrified every step of the way. Jace, she confessed, her voice dropping to a whisper. Not of the assassins. Not of the council. I have been terrified of this. Of daring to love again. Of opening my chest and letting someone in after Kaelor. It feels like jumping off a cliff without a harness. Jace squeezed her hands. I know. I have been terrified too. I have been scared that I am just a rebound, or a curiosity. I have been scared of believing that a life like mine could matter to a life like yours. Sarathra looked into his eyes. Her pupils were wide, endless pools of gold. You matter, she said. You are the only thing that matters. She leaned in. This time there was no adrenaline. There was no impending explosion or desperate survival instinct. There was only choice. She kissed him. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was a question asked and answered in the language of breath and touch. Jace kissed her back, pouring all his fear and all his hope into the moment. He felt the heat of her scales, the strength of her body, and the incredible grounding reality of her affection. It was a promise. A promise to build something together, not in the shadows of maintenance tunnels or escape pods, but here, in the open, under the light of a billion stars. 1 year later, the corridors of Axis 9 were cleaner, though not because people were afraid of the janitors. They were cleaner because the cleaning crews now sat on the Safety Council, in a conference room on level 4. Jace sat at the head of a table covered in blueprints. He wore a suit now, but he had insisted on keeping the utility belt. Around him sat a mix of human engineers and Dravari technicians. Okay, Jace said, tapping a schematic, the new filtration system for the lower decks. If we route the intake through the secondary thermal exchange, we can heat the dorms for free. But we need to widen the conduits. A Dravari engineer hissed thoughtfully. That will require cutting through the main structural bulkhead. The ambassador will not like the noise. The ambassador, Jace said with a grin, will get over it. Tell her I said it is percussive maintenance on a macro scale. The door opened, and Sarathra walked in. She looked regal, carrying a stack of treaties, but her eyes were dancing with amusement. "I heard that," she said. The room scrambled to stand, but Sarathra waved them down. "Sit. Continue. I am just here to steal your director for lunch." Jace stood up, gathering his files. "You are interrupting vital infrastructure planning." "I am interrupting you arguing about pipe diameters," Sarathra corrected. "And you have mud on your shoes." "Director?" Jace looked down. There was a faint smudge of gray dust on the pristine carpet. "Hazard of the job." He shrugged. "Some of us actually visit the construction sites." Sarathra walked over to him. She brushed a speck of dust from his lapel. Her finger lingered for a second, and a tiny, controlled spark of heat left a microscopic scorch mark on the fabric. "Hey!" Jace protested, slapping at the spot. "That is my good jacket." Sarathra smirked. "Consider it a mark of office. Now come, we have a meeting with the trade delegation." They walked out together, the human and the Dravari, arguing playfully about laundry bills and trade tariffs. Behind them, on the wall, the old banner of the Dominion, a dragon rampant over a field of swords, had been replaced. The new banner showed a dragon's claw clasping a human hand, surrounded by the gear teeth of industry. Their life was not a fairy tale. It was hard work. There were still factions that whispered against them, and there were still days when the cultural divide felt like a chasm. But they bridged it, day by day, with humor and honesty. Their romance remained fierce. It was a thing of sharp edges and deep warmth, a constant negotiation of boundaries and instincts. But it was theirs. That evening, Sarathra led Jace to the memorial wing of the consulate. It was a quiet, dimly lit hall where the armor of past warlords stood in silent vigil. At the end of the row stood Kalor's armor, repaired and polished, gleaming in the spotlight. Sarathra visited here often. Jace usually waited outside, respecting her need for privacy. But today, she pulled him in. "Come," she said softly. They stood before the empty suit. The helmet stared back at them, stoic and eternal. Sarathra reached out and touched the breastplate. Then she took Jace's hand and placed it on the cold metal beside hers. Jace flinched slightly, feeling like an intruder. "Sarathra, I should not." "He would have liked you," Sarathra said. Her voice was steady. He respected courage, and he respected people who fixed things. She looked at the armor, then at Jace. "Loving you does not erase him." "Jace, it does not mean I have forgotten. It means I am fulfilling the future he died for. He wanted a world where we could live without armor, where we could touch without fear." Jace looked at the helmet. He felt a heavy, solemn weight settle in his chest. He did not feel jealousy. He felt gratitude. "Thank you," Jace whispered to the empty armor. "Thank you for her. I will take care of her. I promise." Sarathra squeezed his hand. "I know you will." They stepped out onto the balcony of the consulate. Below them, the starport was alive with motion. Ships were launching into the night, streaks of amber and blue fire against the darkness. But they were not warships. They were freighters, passenger liners, research vessels. Humans and Dravari mingled on the concourses, a chaotic, vibrant river of life. The air was cool. Sarathra leaned against the railing, the wind catching the silver braids of her hair. Jace moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder. Her scales were warm against his cheek, a comfort he had come to crave more than anything. "Look at them," Jace said softly, watching the ships. "We did that." "We helped," Sarathra corrected. "They did it themselves. We just opened the door." She turned her head slightly, her lips brushing his ear. You know, she whispered, losing my warlord husband nearly ended me. I thought my life was over. I thought I was just a ghost waiting to fade. She turned in his arms, facing him. Her golden eyes were bright with unshed tears and a fierce, overwhelming joy. But falling in love again with a young human janitor, that taught me how to live, not just survive, not just endure, but live. Jace smiled, the crooked, easy smile that had started it all in a hallway collision a lifetime ago. I'm just glad you did not fire me, he said. Sarathra laughed, a deep, resonant sound that echoed into the night. She pulled him down for a kiss. And for a long time, there was nothing else in the galaxy but the two of them, standing on the edge of a new world, unafraid of the dark,